All right, so here we go. I'm going to try and get my mojo on here, get into the groove, get into the mood. I'll take this little tense energy and I'll hopefully turn it into something good. But so this particular presentation is called Talent Wars. As many of you know, in dealing with the clients that you're talking with, there's an all-out war for talent right now. I once heard a recruiter say it in the best way possible, which is that finding the needle in the haystack hasn't gotten easier with higher unemployment rates. It's just the needle is now in a much larger haystack, right? And so this is the problem that many people are facing. Despite high unemployment rates, despite lots of people looking for work, there's still this kind of war for talent that's going on. So we wanted to go out and present to folks a little bit about what is happening at organizations that are winning the talent wars. And it's a great platform for us because, as some of you may know, I personally, and I think PayScale collectively, have some pretty strong views on how you can win this war that in a lot of ways buck the current trend, right? So the first thing we're going to talk about is the way that this really works, this war on talent, is by taking a sort of micro-market view. And I'm going to talk about in a little bit what that means. But in order to go micro, what we want to do is pull out and go macro first, right? We want to talk about what's been happening to create this situation at a macro level. But first, let's start really broad. So this we all lived through, right? This is the story of what has happened in the last few years. And that is beginning in 2008, GDP drops, corporate profits drop, and so does employee compensation, right? So everything is dropping. We all felt it. We all lived it. Some of you were here at PayScale. We all were like clinging to our jobs, okay? And then what happens is beginning in 2011, we start to feel recovery. And I always tell people as a smaller organization, I think we felt the effects of that 2008 drop first, and we felt the recovery first. So I think small business has this unique ability to feel these changes much more intensely. So beginning in 2008, what we start to see, GDP recovering, corporate profits recovering, employee compensation not recovering. So I ask you, why? What happened? Why is employee compensation not recovering at the same levels? It's a real question. It's not one of those rhetorical questions. Why?
This is the audience participation part.
That's right.
Because employers don't want to part with their money.
Right. So some of it is this feeling like we survived that last little bit. It was brutal. And we don't yet feel comfortable spending money. Very good. Why else?
Lack of data.
Lack of data. So I call this the stutter step, right? I did something one way for a long time. I didn't like it, but I just did it. And then what we did is we did something different, which is we held wages flat, we cut jobs, and in some cases we even cut pay for employees. Now we know we don't want to go back to the old way. We certainly are in a better position to come out of this hold wages flat, but we don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. We don't know how to do something different. And so that's why I call it the employer stutter step. What else? What makes up compensation? It's not just base salary, right? How do you think that has an effect on this view as well? In terms of bonus or profit sharing plans or other factors, it takes a while for those things to catch up. They're not like base pay, which happens immediately. So yes, we're going to start to see the recovery of bonus plans. We're going to start to see the recovery of profit sharing plans, but there's a lag to that. And as you all know, in total cash compensation, that also represents compensation. And so we're not seeing that recovery yet just because it's on that path, and we'll continue to see it go up. So this is a story. We lived it, right? We survived it. And now we got to think about what's new. We got to have an opportunity to think about doing something different in a way that's going to be great for our businesses. So here is one of the fundamental problems that organizations are struggling with. I ask you, what is a job, right? What is a job? In the old days, it was really easy. I had a widget maker, and a widget maker did these 4 tasks, and I paid them to show up every day and do these 4 tasks. Okay? And it was really easy to say, that's the job, and I'm going to go benchmark it, and that's what it is, and it's a warehouse worker, and that's a job. Okay? Nowadays, and this is a great article, it's written by Josh Bernstein, it's on his blog, it's called The End of the Job as We Know It. Right now, you can't tell me what a software engineer 1 does at some company, because software engineer is a great example. We pay people for their expertise. We don't pay them to sit in a desk and crank out widgets. We pay them for their expertise. So every person is unique, every skill set is unique, and we're all scrambling to find the skill sets that we need. This quote here says that what's happening is now we're paying people for their expertise. We're not necessarily paying them because we've decided they're going to be a software engineer one, right? So this is why it's really critical. We're going to pay them for their expertise, not their span of control. This article is very interesting. It talks about some really cool things that companies are doing that are very progressive. For example, there was a company in there that has people bid on every project they do with employees, not contractors. They put the project out. People say, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And then they create a project team and they get the work done. I mean, that's progressive. But that goes back to the point about how many of you have worked with, and I'll change the tone up here a little bit because I would ask this of HR people, but I'm gonna ask all of you. How many of you have tried to price a job for somebody and it's like, well, what does this person do? Well, I'm not exactly sure, right? We got a lot of HR people not exactly sure. And actually, I think we have a lot of managers. I'm not sure what he does, but I know we pay him, and I know it's important, and I know we need it done, right? This is what makes doing things today so hard. It's also why recruiting is hard. You're not going out for a widget maker. You don't say, these are the 4 things you're going to do. Oftentimes, jobs are created around people, right? So that's why, and again, where our tools have an advantage because we can drill down into specifics, but at the end of the day, we have to look at things from a more micro point of view. And again, we'll talk about this some more. So why is this happening? This is happening. So what this chart is telling you is something that's probably pretty obvious to everyone in the room. It's telling us that routine tasks are down, manual tasks are down, and abstract tasks are up. We pay people for what they know and what they can do. We don't pay people to make widgets. And that's where this kind of talent war idea is coming from. So why is hiring so hard? CEOs say that nearly 50% of CEOs say that the skill gap has become more difficult to fill. I need this done, I got these players, and sometimes there's a big gap, right? And you got 2 options for closing that gap. Hire it or train it, okay? And what people are finding is that hiring it is becoming more and more difficult. It's not like there's a million people out doing this certain task. So a lot of people are looking for opportunities to grow that talent internally. And that's actually a very clear way to win the talent wars, is to think about closing your skill gap by investing in your people. But that comes with a risk, right? When we're going to close our skill gap by investing in a person, there's a risk associated with that. And that risk is that if we invest in that person and we don't fairly compensate them, we've blown our strategy, right? We've blown our strategy. And yet I believe as you talk to customers, what you'll hear over and over and over again is our wages are low because we've promoted people. Historically, internal promotion has kept wages low, right? And the problem is that sometimes we see that person as they were, we don't see them in their new capacity. And we've got to, because what happens is if we invest in that person and we train them up, then in theory, they are trained up to go fill that skill gap that's a huge miss in the market. So you know what? Our strategies have to be aligned. If we're going to invest, if we're going to spend training dollars in that person, we also have to balance that with compensation. And it's really, really key. And it's hard, because if you have that person and they're working for you and you think they're reasonably happy and they fit your company culture, you think, I can get away with it, right? What's the risk? But there's a huge risk if that's your strategy, is to grow your talent. Okay? So Facebook is winning the war right now. It's a little bit hard to see, but this is the number of offers that go out and how many times Facebook wins when competing head-to-head with these other companies. So this is Google, this is Microsoft, this is Yahoo. Yahoo has no wins. And this is Apple, and I can't remember which one this is. But the story here is that Facebook is winning the war. How many of you have had clients, even no matter where you're located in the country, that say, I'm trying to compete with the Facebooks of the world? Anybody? Yeah, okay. And you know what I say to them? Good luck. Good luck. Because what does Facebook have that nobody else has? It's only 3 letters. IPO. Okay? It's a done deal. They're going, they filed, they're gonna make people rich. You're never going to be able to compete with that. So stop trying. stop trying, because unless you have gobs and gobs and gobs of money in the bank, I mean gobs, like Facebook gobs of money in the bank, you aren't going to compete. You aren't. You got to be different. That's the thing. Differentiation is what we're going to talk about a little bit more today. Prioritization is what we're going to talk about today. If you go head to head, you will lose. Maybe a year from now, maybe 2 years from now, maybe 3 years from now, you can go head to head with Facebook. Right now, you cannot. They have something you don't have, and you can't create it unless you file for, IPO in the next 2 months, right? So this is an interesting statistic. It's called workforce productivity. It's one of the most simple metrics, and what I loved about it is when we were in Denver, Doug says, I use this all the time. And for public companies, it's really easy to do. You take your revenue and you divide it by your number of employees. And what does this number tell you? This tells you about how many dollars of revenue you get out of every head count. And really good companies get more revenue per employee out of, from each of their employees. So you can't see the numbers here, and I apologize. But the bottom line is that the average is $200,000. $200,000 in revenue for every one employee. And this is a bunch of tech companies. You know what Apple's number is? 1.6 million. That's 2010 data too, by the way. 1.6 million per every head count. Do you think Apple loses a battle over wages if someone gets a competing job offer? Heck no. You know why? Because Apple could give a rip about $20,000. When you're making $1.6 million in revenue for every head count, first of all, you've got to assume that you got pretty good head count. Number two, you're going to do everything you can to keep that head count, and you're not going to let $20,000 stand in your way, right? So this is what's important. People get confused because they think of labor costs as this kind of fixed thing, that if I spend this much for somebody, that I can't afford these people. In the end of the day, it depends on who that somebody is. It depends on who that somebody is. And this is the notion of prioritized treatment. And as I go on and I talk a little bit about prioritized treatment, normally in a room full of HR folks, it makes their skin crawl, right? They start asking about internal equity. And what about getting sued? And here's a fundamental problem we have in HR, and I'll put myself in this group. We make bad decisions with bad information, right? It doesn't matter. I straight up asked a woman, she raised her hand and asked about internal equity, and I said, why do you care about that? Well, because, and she couldn't articulate it very well. And then some other people tried to jump in and they tried to explain this notion of internal equity. And they talked a lot about fairness, or they talked a lot about what's right, or they talked about what if people leave. And I'm like, who are you worried about leaving? Who are you worried about leaving? Because if I'm talking about a prioritized treatment where you invest in your top people, who are you worried about leaving? Your bad performers? Maybe your middle performers? You're going to risk losing your top performers so that you can have internal equity, right? So here's the thing about internal equity and why it's a bad rap and why I don't think you should throw it out of your vocabulary, okay? Most internal equity comes because we didn't have a strategy. It just happened, right? I'm sure you guys have all heard it. Joe's brother, that guy's been with us forever, whatever the case may be. Internal equity happens by accident, okay? When it's thoughtful, when it's strategic, then I think internal equity is a good thing. If you're talking about internal equity between your top 5 performers, great, talk internal equity all you want. Again, if it's a strategic point of view where you're talking about internal equity, great. But if you're just talking about the fact that you want all your software engineers paid the same amount or relatively the same amount, you lose. You just lost the talent wars. You really did, okay? So this is an article from Google, and it says, you know what? We'd rather lose 1,000 incoming programmers rather than one good technologist. The next one is from Bill Gates. He said, I'd rather lose 300 programmers rather than one technologist. So here's my favorite thing when HR starts to try and get strategic. They start tracking metrics, okay? One of my favorite is the turnover metric. Some of you know how I feel about this. Turnover metric, great, let's celebrate, okay? I worked at an organization, we celebrated every day that we had a less than 4% turnover rate. Who cares? I asked the audience in all 4 of our cities, Do you track good turnover versus bad turnover? There's a couple of hands, but not very many. Let's do one thing, and let's do one thing after today. Let's just go back and start tracking turnover by wanted and unwanted. Because sometimes when people leave us, we actually should throw a party because they just made our job a lot easier. No, I'm serious. And all of you are laughing because I'm sure you know it, right? So now all of a sudden, why are we going to penalize ourselves because our turnover rate is now going up because someone just made our job a whole lot easier? How about we track wanted versus unwanted turnover? Simple thing. One of the things I suggested the group could go back and do tomorrow. It didn't take, a huge amount of effort. Just track your unwanted versus wanted turnover. Okay. The other thing, and I'll tell you, so the organization that I worked at, less than 4% turnover. Yay, we're great. We're great. Vice president or director of facilities management came to me and said, I'm worried. I'm worried because we've had no turnover in our skilled trades for 20 years, but I know it's coming. So again, working at this particular institution, we had the benefit of a pension plan. So I went and pulled pension data. I went and pulled employee demographic information. I matched it all up. And what I realized is 32% of the skilled trades workers were eligible to retire in the next 5 years. 52% were eligible to retire in the next 10 years. Now we all know that the difference between eligible to retire and when they actually retire is different, but it didn't matter. Here's the problem with HR playing around with metrics and not knowing what they're doing. I could give a rip if you've had 4% turnover in the past. What are you going to have in the next 10 years? How do you use your metrics to actually project forward, not just look backwards? Because we can celebrate that 4% turnover all we want. Here's the thing about skilled trades. There isn't a ready supply of people coming up the ranks who are really good in the skilled trades. And we're not doing enough to train young people in skilled trades. So you know what? There's a huge gap that's about to happen. So we can sit back and we can celebrate our 4% turnover, but it's not going to mean anything. And that is a missed opportunity for HR. That is taking metrics and not being strategic about it. That is losing the talent wars. Okay? So I'm really passionate about this, but HR needs to stop thinking that they're strategic because they calculate turnover and start thinking about what it means for their organization and what if you lost 3 people that were incredibly valuable to your company, but you only lost those 3? Are you going to celebrate? I don't think so. Many of you have probably heard the 12 names in the drawer story, so I apologize. But just to make sure everybody's heard it one more time, I was working with a client recently, and the client signed on she bought Insight, and she bought Solution Consulting. And as many of you know, we mandate that there's an exec meeting as a part of Solution Consulting to talk about comp strategy. And it is hard sometimes to get the exec team together. And twice, early on in my career in Solution Consulting, I made the mistake of saying, okay, let's move forward. And twice, I came to regret that decision. So it doesn't happen ever again. The exec call happens. I don't care if we have to wait 8 weeks to start your project. We're not starting without your executive buy-in. So anyway, I'm talking to this woman. I'm like, you've got to get your CEO on the phone. She goes, you don't understand how hard that is. And I said, well, it's got to happen. So she's like, okay. So she was relatively new to the organization, thank goodness. So she had that honeymoon period where she could tell her CEO something and actually do it, And so she said, you have to come to this call, right? So he said, okay, you got 15 minutes. She tells me, you got 15 minutes. I'm like, oh gosh. So I'm like talking fast. And I'm like, listen, all I need from you is I need to understand where your priorities lie relative to compensation. She had already told me this guy doesn't give a rip about compensation, which is always sort of curious to me. How, as an executive of a company, do you not care about compensation? How do you not care about the single largest cost of doing business? Here is what I believe about what you're hearing when people say that. That CEO does not like how he has experienced compensation in the past. That CEO has had what I call bad HR. You know what bad HR is? Well, you can't do that. That's beyond the range. I want to create pay ranges so I can tell you guys what you're going to hire people in at. That's bad HR. Bad HR. That's a person who wants to buy our products to build a compensation plan for their own resume, who's not solving business issues, who's not solving real problems, who wants to be able to say, yeah, I built a comp plan. Never mind, I purchased Solution Consulting, they did it for me. I built a comp plan, right? That's called an HR resume building exercise, and that's bad HR. So when you say that your CEO or your executive team doesn't care about compensation, I call BS. I say you haven't done a good enough job about hitting their pain points, is what I say. So anyway, so she gets the guy on the phone, And I'm talking about, the compensation plan, and all I need from him is a strategy. And I need a strategy to understand where he needs to invest his dollars as an organization. And I said, I need to know where are the areas that we've got to overinvest in to make sure that you guys are successful, because they were trying to 2x, 3x, 4x like many of our companies, right? And he goes, oh, you mean like the 12 names in the drawer, right? 12 names in the drawer. There's 12 names on the drawer on a piece of paper. It's sitting in my top drawer. There's 3 executives in this company, and they know who those 12 people are. Those people can have anything. Anything they want. Anything. Can you imagine? They can have anything they want. There's a comp strategy. So I said to him, great, let's figure out how to pay for that. Because you can't pay for those 12 people by paying everybody at the 90th percentile. So let's make it happen. All of a sudden, CEO is engaged. All of a sudden, CEO is delegating this project to members of his executive team because we hit his pain point. We made it relevant. He doesn't care about compensation, BS. She called me the next day. She asked me if she was on the list. I told her I didn't think so. I told her you can get there, but you're not right now. Remember, she was new, so this wasn't. And again, I know that that's a luxury we have on the service side that you guys don't have on the new business side. But so let's talk about this micro-market revolution. I've been talking about how important it is to not look at things at such a big perspective, to think about things in a prioritized way. The micro-market revolution is the right approach for a workforce of service and knowledge workers. So this is, 99% of the people we talk to? Even manufacturing is a knowledge industry right now, right? How much technology is involved in your manufacturing clients? They're not widget makers anymore. How many of you have, technology companies that are building technologies where you need a bachelor's degree to run the machines, right? So even manufacturing is a knowledge and surface worker. So this is what we need. Hiring workers is about labor cost to complete a project, not just about how much I pay workers. If I can get my products built with 5 people who cost $100,000, that's a better decision than 20 people who cost $50,000, correct? So all of this is important because it's not about saying, you know what? I'm only going to pay this. That's all I'm going to pay. Because you know what you're going to get? You're going to get the profile of the person that will work for that. And that may or may not get the project complete. The analogy we always give is how many writers or novelists do you have to hire to write the world's greatest novel? 1, 5, 50, 100? Really, in theory, you only need 1, but you need the right one. And it doesn't matter that that person wants $500,000 because a best-selling novel is going to generate that in revenue. So you can try and hire 100 workers and pay them $50,000 and hope they bust out a best-selling novel, and maybe you'll have a little Rawlings, is that her name, Rawlings? Yeah, Harry Potter moment for you. But that's like taking a big giant, bet everything on red, at the roulette table? Yeah, the roulette table. I was going to say craps table. I'm like, wait a minute. Without a micro-market view, we think we're spending too much or too little on talent, and yet we don't know. We don't know. They're just numbers. They're numbers until we influence it with the other parts of our organization. Performance management, hiring the right people, knowing what people are doing and how the work is getting accomplished. So here's a question that I pose to all our HR audience. Are you playing to win, or are you standing back hoping you don't lose? So there was a great blog post written by this guy around March Madness time, and he was talking about HR as like a March Madness theme. And he said, are you standing back at half court and handing the ball around, hoping the other team doesn't steal it to run down the clock? That's called playing not to lose. Are you driving the lane and putting up the ball in the last second shot? That's playing to win. Too much of what's happening in HR right now is we're standing at half court and we're passing the ball around and hoping somebody doesn't steal it. And I'm ready to see HR take a revolutionary approach to this. I'm ready to see them drive to the basket. Drive to the basket means being bold. It means saying, I don't care about internal equity because internal equity is not going to get us where we need to be. I don't care about making sure that people get an across-the-board increase because the cost of living is going up. I'm going to spend my 3% on 10% of my population because those are the people who deserve it. And you know what? Bring it on. Those 90% want to talk about it with me? Bring it on. right? That's playing to win. So this was an interesting thing because there was 2 articles in the same publication on the same day talking about HR directors. Number 1, LinkedIn will not replace resumes, says most HR directors. The second article, quality of HR senior leadership is declining. I think there's a coincidence there. Now listen, I'm not saying the LinkedIn is the new, greatest thing ever. What I am saying is Joe shared an interesting story in Denver. He said, listen, electrical engineers right now are hard to find. They're hard for me to find. They're hard for everybody to find. So you know what I do? I put my phone number and my email on the job posting. You should have seen the HR audience. You do what? You actually put your personal phone? He goes, I put my cell phone number too. And they're just like, you do what? Right? All of you have been job searching. Have you ever seen a personal cell phone number on there? He goes, I don't want to create a barrier for an electrical engineer to come work here. And you know what? If that means I got to pick up the phone and tell a recruiter for the 100th time, no, I don't want to use your services, and if you keep calling me, I'm never going to use your services, then that's worth it, because I don't want a barrier. He's like, some of my colleagues, when they have somebody that's interested, they make them go to the website and fill out an application. You know, the big, long, fill in the blanks. Is that playing to win? I don't think so. Listen, in HR, we have to have applications. We've got to know who our applicants are. There's all sorts of crazy reasons for it. So that's the reason why people do it. But that is a strategy that's causing them to lose the war. Just rethink it. Just rethink it. And that's what's important. You know what? LinkedIn did the most brilliant thing ever, what recruiters couldn't do for tens of thousands of years. Not that there were recruiters for tens of thousands of years, but they got all of us to go in and put everything about our whole work history on a website. And you know what that is? That gives us access to what we call the passive job seeker. Recruiters for years have died. I know there's some former recruiters in the room. We have died for years to get access to the passive job seeker, that person that's not looking for a job. LinkedIn did it for all of us, right? And it's changing the dynamic. Many of you have heard this story again, so I apologize. One of our clients has a competitor down the street who is sitting on LinkedIn, and when their technical service reps hit 2 years, they're hiring them. Every single one of them. They wait till the 2-year mark. You want to know why? Because they know they hire good people and they know they train them well. And they hire them at an appropriate wage for a recent college graduate with no experience. Market data, we pulled the reports. They're dead on. They're actually even, I think, $800 more than what they're supposed to be paying. You know what the problem is? You know what happens to the maturity curve? Never mind the market for a minute. Never mind. You know what happens to the maturity curve in 2 years with a technical service rep? It goes up about $10,000. Guess what? They haven't done raises in 2 years. Guess what? When they did 3% raises. Guess what? Those guys just became the cheapest hires that company has ever had. And you know what? They're just sticking with it. They're just waiting. They're just waiting until those people hit 2 years and they're bringing them over. So what's interesting about this client is we started talking with them about this and ways to prevent this. And the obvious thing is, well, let's pay these guys more. CFO said, I can't do it. I can't do it. So you know what the VP said? Well, then you know what? We're going to pay the heck out of our director, because their director created this training program and she manages all the managers of these people. So you know what they're going to do? That woman is paid off the charts. There's no number in our tool that gets to what she's paid, and that's their strategy. Right or wrong, good or bad, I don't know. But you know what? They're going to make sure that woman who gets people in, gets them trained, and coaches managers to be good managers is never going to leave, because she's one of the 12 names in the drawer. And you know what? They've benefited because some, I know this is crazy, but some people are willing to stay for good management and good training. And they're willing to take the pay cut. Okay? That's playing to win. That is playing to win. So how do we play to win? What does HR need to do? Number 1, create a high performance culture. Let me ask you this. Can compensation create a high performance culture? The obvious answer as a compensation company would be yes. Wrong. Sorry. If we could all write a check and get it, we would. Here's what you can do. You can support and reinforce a high performance culture. And if you have a high performance culture and you don't have a smart compensation plan, you will kill your high performance culture. If Joe sitting next to you slacks off all day, playing words with friends and still has his job and still gets his 2% raise, you will kill your high performance culture. Guaranteed. Your top performers will leave or they will sink to the lowest level of acceptability in your organization. So HR needs to help create a high performance culture. It doesn't come from just writing a check, but compensation plans are the single most important pillar in supporting a high performance culture. And this is where we finally get to talk about pay. Here's what we need to do. A high performance culture is supported by a compensation plan that rewards what? And you can peek on the slide ahead of me. What do we need to reward? Performance and output. Are we going to reward people for activity? Are we going to reward people for teamwork? Are we going to reward people for longevity? No. Now listen, I'm not saying do away with those things. I don't want everybody to have a workforce of jerks. I really don't. Okay? But what I'm saying is when it comes down to how you choose to spend your money as a company, invest it where you get performance and output. And everybody is capable of that. That doesn't just mean you have to pay your sales team. Everyone is capable of performance and output, but we need to de-emphasize activity. We need to de-emphasize longevity, except as longevity relates to important business outcomes. If longevity means I've got that person who knows all my key clients, if longevity means I've got that person who has internal knowledge of this place that nobody else has, that garners rewards. Okay, but not just for the sake of longevity, right? So how do we, go about doing this? This is a fun slide. Anybody seen the next Netflix slide? It's out on the SlideShare. It's a million different places, right? And I know Netflix has had their own issues recently, but Netflix has this very sort of controversial approach to most HR things. Number one, they don't have a vacation policy. Have you guys heard this? You take vacation when you need vacation. That's their vacation policy. Get your job done. I don't care if that's 1 day, I don't care if that's 15 days, right? Pretty progressive. Again, most HR people like, oh God, no, you can't do that, right? And I'm not saying it's going to work for everyone, but you know what? It works for them because they've built an infrastructure to support it. What do you need to have an infrastructure that supports that? Number one thing? Results, absolutely, yeah. I think you need to have a good management structure because a good manager says, hey, just noticed you're on your third week of vacation and your projects aren't getting done. You need to get those done. And you wouldn't believe how hard that is for a lot of different managers. So Netflix, and this is one part, if you're interested, just go search Netflix HR slideshow or benefits slideshow or something. There's a whole big slideshow. It's pretty interesting. But it says we're a team, not a family. And we're not a kids recreation team, we're a pro sports team. Not everybody gets equal playing time and we all get a trophy at the end, right? Coach's job at every level is to hire, develop, and cut smartly so that they have stars in every position. Here comes the soapbox moment. When we give people a title of manager, guess what their job is? To manage. This is really hard for some people to figure out. Your job is to get work done through others. So guess what? If you can't manage, you're not doing your job. If you can't manage, how about we just go ahead and take that manager away from your title? How many times have you heard this? At Netflix, cutting smartly means adequate performance gets a generous severance package. Why? Otherwise, managers feel too guilty to let someone go. How many of you have heard from an HR person some form of the phrase guilt? Right? Managers live this every day. There's 2 reasons a manager should feel guilty about letting someone go. You didn't tell them what you expected of them, and you didn't give them feedback. If you did those 2 things, guess what? No guilt. Doug Smith said it beautifully when he presented for Tetra Tech in Denver. He says, we don't owe you a job. We don't owe you a job. So you know what? If our managers are doing those 2 things, A, I told you what I expected of you, and then B, I gave you feedback, we shouldn't feel guilty. So this comes back to performance reviews. This comes back to what we deal with every day, compensation. Why should we feel guilty if we have a 3% budget in giving it to the 10% of people who are our superstars? What part of guilt should a manager feel for that? I understand the human side of it. I understand the person and their struggles to, maybe they got an elderly parent living with them. Maybe they're losing their home. Maybe they got a sick child who has really extensive medical bills. I'm not saying managers need to strip out every piece of their heart. But I'm saying at the end of the day, why would a manager feel guilty about giving the people who worked their butt off the most resources that they have at their disposal? Why would they feel, wouldn't you feel guilty that you gave it to everybody and that Joe over there working his butt off got the same as, Words with Friends guy? Feel guilty about that if you're going to feel guilty about anything. So, how do we win the war? We win the war with prioritized treatment. This is my new kind of mantra. Prioritized treatment. And again, to HR people, this just makes their skin crawl because we are trained classically to avoid prioritization. Okay? We're the fairness people. We're making sure there's no discrimination going on. So let me just caveat this by saying it is still illegal to reward people on the basis of a protected class. Gender, religion, age. Okay? You can't have those factors involved. But you can have other factors. Not all individuals, process, functions, and business units have the same impact on results. You guys have heard us talk about it a million times in solution consulting. I don't think the right strategy for most organizations is let's target the 50th percentile for everybody. That's not a strategy. I mean, it's an approach, but it's not a strategy. Let's get down and let's talk about it. Let's talk about where positions should be targeted in the market. And you know what? Let's be okay with the fact that some are at 90th and some are at 40th and some are at 75th. That's all what we have to do to make it at the end of the day sum up to what we need to sum it up to. So what do we need to do? We need to prioritize jobs, key employees, and business units, and then allocate the greatest portion of the resources to those high priority areas. This is the mission, prioritization. Now here's the big thing about prioritization. You've got to know A, what you want to reward, and B, you've got to be able to monitor people to that. Which I know sounds kind of obvious, but to a lot of a lot of organizations and to a lot of HR is the first big miss. They do across the board increases because they don't know how to do anything better. They don't even know who their top performers are, and frankly, they don't even know what people are doing. And that's the real trouble. So as an organization, you got to step back a minute and you got to say, listen, it's my responsibility to help the organization figure out what are people doing, what's our strategy relative to compensation, get data to support that, and then make it happen. And you know what? With some of the clients we work with, it doesn't happen overnight. They're not going for the whole kit and caboodle right away. Going from across the board to prioritize based on performance rating is not something you can just do overnight sometimes. Some organizations can, but that's not the right approach for everyone. The right approach is the one that's right for the business. And that's what's really key. So this is a slide that won't surprise anybody. There's an ongoing shift to pay for performance. So here's my favorite question. So Stacey, what is everybody doing for increases this year? Anybody got that question before? I'll give you the answer. It'll be good from here to eternity, 2.5%. No, I'm not lying. It is literally, with the exception of the last few years where it went to 0. If you answer 2.5%, I guarantee you're right. You want to know why? Nobody's spending more than that. Because guess what? Nobody can afford to spend more than that on base pay. You know what the really important thing is? Is that 11.2% is going to variable or at-risk pay. That's where there's a big difference. So you know what? So next time somebody asks you that, say 2.5%, and then say, but why does it matter? Why does it matter? Because if your 2.5% is not going to get you anywhere close to your strategy, then why do it? If 2.5% is going to send you sailing past your strategy, why do it? What does 2.5% matter to you? If you don't have a clue about what's going on, I mean, it's so fascinating to me that HR are obsessed with this idea of let's do what everybody else is doing. Do you think your VP of product is saying that every day? Oh, I know, let's go do what everybody else is doing. I don't know why HR has such this obsession about let's do what everyone else is doing. How about figure out what everyone else is doing and do it one step better? How about that? How about figure out what everybody else is doing and then figure out a way to make it more creative? You know, that's a strategy. That's good HR. Bad HR, oh, everybody else is 2.5%. Guess what, CFO? We need to do 2.5% this year. Bad HR. Talent war, lose. And this is why. This is what we call merit math. I'm sure you guys have all seen this. When we do a merit matrix and we've got 3% to work from and we're afraid to differentiate, you know what the difference between our high performers are and our low performers? About 2.5%. That's the difference I got because I'm a high performer this year. You know what we call that? Thanks a latte. You know what I told HR? Don't bother. No, seriously, don't bother. It's actually worse than doing nothing. You want to know why? When you give someone 2.5% more and say thanks for all your hard work, it equates to about a latte. And what does that mean to somebody? Nothing. Nothing. It's worse. Because you know what that 2.5% is? It's not about those dollars that it's associated with. It's what you just told me about my worth to this company. 2.5%? Seriously? No, thank you. What's that?
Tipping your server a penny.
Exactly. The server will tell you they'd rather you not leave anything than leave the penny. It's an insult. So I told HR, don't insult your people. If you don't have the money to do it right, don't do it. Or only do it for the 10% of people that you can. So these are some results of our comp practices survey, which you guys I think have seen. But one of the most interesting things was on the issue about people leaving for pay elsewhere. This is the first year in quite a few years that we've seen that pop up as the number one reason. And we all know why, right? The last few years we were hunkered down. We were hoping to goodness that we could save our job and that we wouldn't go on unemployment. Because many of us have had friends that have lived there and it's a horrible place to be. It just gets you stuck in this kind of cycle. So you know what? We want to hold on to our job. So last year, the last 2 years were the first time that people started giving raises again. And yet people are leaving for more money elsewhere. You want to know why? It's not about the money. I stuck with you. I rode this with you. You're performing better now and you're not sharing it with me. And this company says they value me. No matter how much in HR or in what we do every day, we tell people it's not about your worth. It's about the position. They don't hear it. You made a decision to allocate increases in a way that only gave me 2.5% after I rode the last 4 years with you. You think you're really going to be able to counter that job offer? No, because it wasn't about money. Now it was personal. Now it was personal. And that company says, I want you. Right? I think I was watching The Voice last night, right? And how many of the performers are like, they pick a coach because all of a sudden that person goes, I want you. I want you. Think about how powerful that is. You think you can overcome that with a few $1,000s? I want you. I've always wanted you. You're the person I want. Won't you please come join my team? You think we can counteract that with money? It's hard. Some positions you can, but it's hard. Comp Practices Survey, which says, listen, the number one concern is employee retention. So what's my answer to that? Start introducing prioritized treatment into your organization. Start small if you need to. Start small. And then comp adjustments. Guess what? Everybody's doing comp adjustments again. Hallelujah, great. Let's make sure that when you're doing them in a way that's smart. So this is a sample of the merit matrix. Many of you are very familiar with it. I tell people if you have done nothing yet to kind of push your organization towards pay for performance, start here. This is what we call elementary level, right? This is all of a sudden, let's just put a little bit of prioritization into your merit increases. Just a little bit. We don't have to go full bore, but this is step one. From here, you can go to step 2 and you can go to step 3. Step 2 is starting to put more zeros in the bottom there, right? Because the more zeros you put into the merit matrix, the bigger the increases get at the top. Step 3, start building incentives around performance and output. And every position in the organization can do that. Many of you have heard this story that we had a client who was doing that in their eye centers, okay? They were doing it in their eye centers with their office managers. And when we originally started, they wanted to base it on 7 variables. Big no-no. because they were building an activity into their customer service, satisfaction. Listen, I'm a big fan of customer satisfaction, but you know what? You can't get to results without customer satisfaction, right? And if you can, then you have a little bit of a weird business model, and it really does cause you to ask, do I really have to provide those levels of customer service? Not that that's a way to think about it, but instead of putting the customer service metric in there, let's just put the results. Guess what? They're gonna have to perform well. They're gonna have to serve their customers well to get that performance out of them. So we don't have to incent on customer satisfaction. We have to teach them how to do customer satisfaction to get to those results. That's the third lever. So that was what the challenge for organizations that have already mastered the merit matrix, already bringing in prioritized treatment into other processes. Now take it one step further. Let's just do away with merit-based pay increases all across the board. Really. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal. To actually know that when we give people money, it's either because the market changed, their skill set changed, or they performed at a level that they deserved it. Those are the three things that should dictate increases. Market change, skill set change, performance. And that's that. Any questions? Thank you. Yes?
Isn't it expensive for a company to have a revolving door at the bottom of that matrix? You know, so you just constantly bringing in people that aren't performing and constantly getting rid of them. Like that's
Absolutely. So what do we do about it? We revisit our recruiting strategies, right?
Yeah.
If we're looking at this and going, or you know what, the other thing you do is you look at where they're coming from. Oh, they all happen to be coming from the same department. Want to take a guess at what the real problem is there? Yeah. See, here's the problem in HR. We become obsessed with the high-level issue instead of the root cause issue. Why is this happening? What's going on? You know, Joe made a good point again, and sorry, Denver is just recent in my mind, so I'm thinking about it a lot. Joe said, listen, we look at the data and then we ask ourselves questions. We don't assume. We ask ourselves questions. What's going on? Many of you may not know this. I know there's a few of you that have HR recruiting backgrounds. You know, I always tell people that I have a hard time when you're at a party and you're socializing and people ask you what you do. In my previous life, I never told anybody I worked in HR because you get like one of two reactions, and 8 times out of 10 you get this, oh, right? And part of it is and it's so funny because I've talked a lot with my partner about this, and he's just like, oh yeah, HR, they're never available. Door's always closed. You never get someone to call me back, right? What in the world is HR doing that the door is closed all the time? Shuffling papers? Filing forms? You know, I mean, let's get to the root cause of what's going on in our organizations and stop being obsessed with forms. I did a little tangent on how much I hate performance review forms at some of the Talent Wars. You want to have real performance conversations with people. It's not a form where you circle some numbers. That's not performance management. It's the farthest thing from it. Again, it's almost worse than just not doing anything at all. Anyway, thank you, sorry.
I know you said a few times, you know, HR people don't get it. They say their CEO doesn't care about comp. You can tell them about bad HR. And we hear this stuff all the time, where I want to give a 2.5% increase, and that's bad HR. Is there any way we can articulate that on the new business side, HR people, in a more gentle
I think, again, I think the question is to say, why are you doing it that way? Why is your CEO wanting to do it that way? What's been...
No, that's just how it's always been done.
Well, and then I always tell them there's some reason, right? We don't do things just randomly as individuals. We do things because of a result we've gotten in the past. My guess is that he has worked in an organization that done things in a really poor way, had really bad experiences, had a lineup outside his door, people wanting to complain about him, and no one in the organization, not managers, not HR, would intercept that for him. Address his fear head on. Tell him that you want to create a solution so that we don't go to that, but we don't live in this 2.5% world. Create a solution to fix whatever his issue is or her issue is, right? The problem is we just assume, and I know it's hard. Listen, hey, it's a lot easier up here. It's even a lot easier up here than it was ever when I worked internal HR, okay? I'm here to just motivate people. I'm here to have them push the envelope. Not all of your prospects are going to be equipped to do that. But what you want them to do is ask the questions. Why does he want to do it that way? What in his past has led him to want to do it this way? And how can we find a better solution for him? You know, tell him the 12 names in the drawer story, right? Like, there's a guy who didn't care about comp, but he did actually. And I always tell people, listen, if you can't tackle the whole world at once, walk into your CEO and say, who are the 12 people that we need to make sure never leave this organization? Start there. That's actually a pretty decent way to get to comp strategy really easily. And guess what? Most CEOs would love to tell you that, or at least some variation. Maybe they don't name names, but they'll go there with you. They'll tell you about their fears about who they're going to lose and why. Other questions?